Welcome to Pembrey Circuit in southwest Wales. Well, you can see by the water on the lens that the conditions that greeted the riders here, not of the best. In fact, on the Sunday, it was absolutely filthy conditions. Constant rain and puddles all over the track, and you can see the young riders in the Aprilia RS125 Superteens gingerly making their way around to the grid. Well, these are the latest rounds of the Aprilia 125 Superteens. We've got the Triumph Triple Challenge coming up in this programme as well. But you can see down there on the start line, absolutely torrential rain. Well, it's not going to put off these youngsters, I can tell you. Number 52, Danny Kent on pole position. Just looking back at 79, Grant Whittaker, he's on the second row. But away for the first race of the Sunday. And a good start from the front row by Johnny Blackshaw. Johnny on the number 24 machine, been getting better and better over the last few events, and alongside him there goes number 4, that's James Folkard, the championship leader coming into this weekend, but both of them out-fumbled by little Danny Kent, that number 52 bike just squeezing through on the inside of the hairpin. That's the Hatchett's hairpin here at Pembrey, and it's one of the most extreme hairpins on any of the British racing circuits. Pembrey, a race circuit only for around just under a quarter of a century. Used to be an RAF station, which was decommissioned, and some Welsh racing enthusiasts got together and built this circuit. A lot of riders love it. It's a long way to come for a number of them, particularly those based around the southeast of England, but they always enjoy their trips. These youngsters, of course, for many of them, will be the first time they've been there. A couple of them have been in this series for a few seasons now, and they'll know it, but not that well. But it is James Folkard that leads through this very sharp kink at Woodlands, and then down into Honda Curve, one of the more daunting corners in racing, and it leads onto this incredibly long straight, which is literally a sit down and blast if it's dry, but they have to be very careful on the exit of this corner in these conditions. James Folkard, bit of a water baby there, leads well down into Hatchett's. Danny Kent ahead of Johnny Blackshaw and George Rustling, then Grant Whittaker. It's Rhys Rothwell up next, and Casey Wyatt. That's his highest position so far of the season as he pursues Rhys out through the murk. And I tell you what, these cameras picking up pretty good visibility. It's not nearly as fun for the riders when they're looking through the visors. They'll be partially steamed up, they'll be covered in water. Of course, this coming off the back of the rounds at Brands Hatch, where James Folkard, championship leader this weekend, won all 4 races. Yesterday here at Pembrey, though, it was little 52, Danny Kent, who picked up both wins in the dry. In the wet, though, well, he's up in a second and dogging the footsteps of James. James down into Honda Curve once again, and Danny, you fancy closing in slightly there. Johnny Blackshaw, who's putting some tremendous performances both here and at Brands, and indeed back at Cadwell Park as well. He's one of a group of these young riders who look on the verge of picking up a first win. Johnny's one of them, George Rustling another, Rhys Rothwell. They are all in with a shout of a maiden win. And Grant Whittaker there, picking his way through the puddles. He'll be being watched very closely by his dad, an ex-racer, of course. Many of the dads and mums lining the pit wall. And they're coming towards us, George Rustling. Once again, Grant closing on George. They've been having a good battle. It's been going on lap after lap after lap. They've been taking turns. And we see Grant closing once again on George. And is he going to get by? Well, he's not quite close enough to make a decisive manoeuvre in these conditions. Up the front, still James Folkard from Danny Kent. Danny closing on James and getting away a little bit from Johnny Blackshaw. And there you see Grant completing that manoeuvre. Grant Whittaker just nipping inside George Rustling. That I'm sure will change time and time around. They've been swapping their lead of that little battle. There they go again. There goes George. Probably 3 or 4 times a lap. Lovely stuff in these horrible conditions. Well, it's still the George and Grant show, because this time coming down to the hairpin, it's George just in front and Grant thinking about sticking it up the inside, but no, he just backs out of that one, but gets good speed on the exit. Thank you very much. Through he goes. Another change of position, and George says, hold on, no, that's me, here I come. And they change back again. Up the front, it's still James Folkard just holding off Danny Kent. These two first and second in the championship. There's the George and Grant show once again. And meanwhile, Ross Ashman there at the hairpin. Ross, who picked up a win at the first event of the season at Brands Hatch. Oh, and a bit of a wet wiggle there. A bit of a Mr. Whippy by James Folkard. But you can see why he's under pressure. Danny Kent right with him. And that's Johnny Blackshaw with the lapped Ben Broadway just behind him. And there, episode 33 of this superb little battle for 4th place. Grant Whittaker nipping ahead there. I'm assured that his dad was absolute mustard in wet weather conditions when he was racing at British Championship level. But, well, Grant seems to have picked it up in the genes somehow, and it's not too shabby up front either. James and Danny, real pressure for James Folkard. He knows absolutely where Danny Kent is, and of course Danny, well, he's got the side of that rear tyre, and it has to be said, a face full of spray as well. Now, none of these young riders will have vast experience of wet weather racing, but what they do know, particularly these two, is the championship at the moment is really up for grabs between just those two. Good points available for the others, but you fancy at this stage of the season that the eventual championship winner must be either James Folkard or Danny Kent. Real head-to-head stuff behind. Nose to tail once again, Grant Whittaker and George Rustling. Real entertaining racing in these nasty conditions. There they are at the top of the picture. Johnny Blackshaw in a good and now comfortable 3rd place. He can't really get back in touch, I fancy, in these conditions with the 2 leaders, but he is managing to keep ahead of this battle for 4th. And at the moment, Grant Whittaker has held 4th for almost an entire lap. Splendid stuff there, and unusual as far as this race is concerned. Oh, and James, you can't say he's not on the ragged edge, and that little wiggle there causes him to run wide at Hatchets, but Danny Kent cannot take advantage. Riding right away around the outside of the hairpin there, and you see Danny duck his head, you almost fancy, ooh, and that was nearly goodnight Vienna. But James just no brakes, just sitting up there and letting it roll back a bit. And Danny, I think, furious with himself that he wasn't able to take perhaps more advantage of that. There, further back down the field, we have Casey Wyatt. His best race of the season so far in these conditions. And Danny Kent with just about a lap and a quarter to run, lining up James Folkard there as they come into Honda, and they're coming up behind one of the slower runners, that's Ty Morgan Jones, but well, he makes it stick. Danny just gets his nose in front, but James stays on the power. He's going to be leading down into Hatchets, but Danny just sticks it up the inside. That's what he wanted to do a lap ago. This time, oh, and he gets well out of shape there. You see the puddle on that back tyre, and it nearly spits him off, but again, a great save. These two guys racing as hard as you like in this filthy stuff. It is, however, look at the puddles there, but James and Danny, unabated speed. They got more riders to lap, and well, I tell you what, the track behaviour of some of these young riders is phenomenal. It's not the easiest thing in the world. You don't have mirrors on a race bike. You've only got blue flags from the marshal's post to help you get out of the way when the faster bikes are coming, and it's not always easy to see them in the rain, but James Folkard it is, back in front. Danny Kent, look at him, dogging his every footstep and slip sliding as they come round and down to Honda for the last time. This is where Danny got past before. This time he's going for the outside line. We'll see. James, though, head down and heading for home. He's got the advantage. Danny just not going to make it. Checkered flag. And, well, I think an absolutely brilliant win. Yes, you love that, don't you, James? And Danny looks a bit peeved with himself, but frankly, he's got absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. He was pressing James Folkard hard all the way, had to put up with his own twitches, and well done, guys. That's it. That's the spirit. So James Folkard takes the win from Danny Kent. Grant Whittaker finished in third. He just nabbed it off Johnny Blackshaw right at the end there. George Rustling, a good fifth. And Casey Wyatt, his best finish in sixth place. And three very damp riders on the podium there. Great to see smiling faces at the end of that. And now it's the turn of the older riders. It's the Triumph Triple Challenge with the Michelin Young Guns. That action coming up next. Well, back here in southwest Wales at Pembrey, the rain's still coming down, but it's abated slightly just in time for the first round of the Triumph Triple Challenge. And the grid forming up. There's James Wainwright on 26, but pole position was number 8, Michael Booth. Alongside him, James Wainwright, then number 7, James Dye, and number 34, Tony Hart, the leading challenge runner. The challenge being run for riders of 25 years and older. The Michelin Young Guns, those under 25. Down they go towards Hatchets for the first time. We've got a camera on board. The number 69 machine of AJ Hutchinson, AJ, young Irish rider, and my goodness me, that's what you get in the damp in the Triumph Triple Challenge. Great shots these. I mean, obviously the water affecting the vision there, but that, believe me, is not as bad as it's affecting the vision of the riders. James Dye, after another electric start. He's always been a good starter. He was a good starter when he was on an Aprilia Super Team, but now on the Triumphs he seemed to have kept that skill. He leads from Michael Booth and James Wainwright. Another great shot from AJ's bike here. And it's Tony Hart, who was the leading challenge runner, starting on the outside of that front row of the grid, who is in 4th place at the moment. This a very rare thing this season to see anybody other than Ricky Chadwick up the front of the challenge runners. Meanwhile, at the front, a bit of a change. Michael Booth, well, a potential change anyway, gets up alongside James Dye. It's not going to quite come off. And a good shot of Paul Davis there, second of the challenge runners at the moment. The problem with the manoeuvre that Michael Booth made there is you lose a bit of drive out of the hairpin by making an attempt that doesn't come off, and sure enough, he does lose that position. James Wainwright just nips up the inside as they run towards the S's. So James Dye from James Wainwright, the two Jameses at the front. Michael Booth tucked in there. Still Tony Hart up the front. There's Paul Davis, not that far back from that leading group. Second of the challenge runners, but Tony, a very good performance so far here at Pembrey. And coming off the back of 4th place in the Super Pole race for Tony, and the first time that anyone has won anything this season in the challenge other than Ricky Chadwick. So good performance from Tony down here in Welsh Wales. And there we see James Dye putting on the anchors gently as possible down into Hatchets, and that time James Wainwright didn't appear to have such a good line through the hairpin, and Michael Booth was all over him immediately, couldn't quite squeeze through, but it just goes to show that these weather conditions are a great equaliser. One tiny twitch, one small mistake, somebody's going to be there to punish it, and that somebody may just be number 14 there, Josh Cagill. Josh, another ex-Aprilia Superteeny, enjoying his time in the Triumphs, and this his best performance so far of the year. He'll be loving this. Not sure whether it's just the conditions or whether He's made the necessary leap in terms of getting used to racing his Triumph, but a great performance from Josh at the moment. There he is. And still James Dye in the lead from James Wainwright. James Wainwright there with that almost checkered flag pattern on the helmet. A lot of these riders wearing wet weather overalls over their leathers, and makes it a little difficult to pick them out. But there, Josh Cagle, well, he'll be picking them off. One tiny error from any of the leading three, and Josh is going to be right in there. Out through DeBenny towards the S's. As the race goes on, James Dye looking a little more confident these conditions, but there in the background, oh, it's Tony Hart. Tony, what are you doing? Going for a swim on the grass. That's exactly the place where he ditched it in qualifying, and now he's done the same thing, the exit of DeBenny. Well, Tony was leading the challenge, but I'm afraid his challenge has come to naught in these filthy conditions. And there, a lovely shot of Rob Guinan. You normally see a lot more blue from Rob, but he has got these wet weather coveralls on, but he is closing in 5th position. So Josh Cagle in 4th, still with Michael Booth in 3rd, but challenging because he comes up on the outside of James Wainwright as they come down to hatches, and he just chops across his nose there. So James Dye is that leads, but Michael Booth now back up to 2nd. James Wainwright will have to regroup because Josh Cagle will be right on his case. That will allow Josh a little bit closer. And there we see number 71, that's Michael Collins, one of the young guns. He's having a great race with Ben Cater, one of the challenge competitors. Now Ben is up into, let's see, 2nd place in the challenge in this race. With the disappearance of Tony Hart, Ricky Chadwick is back at the front of the challenge. Ben Cater is running in 2nd, and Paul Davis, he's still there. He's running 3rd at the moment in the challenge. And there, a good shot of Rob Guinan once again, now closing on Josh Cagle. Up the front, still James Dye. Michael Booth, having got past James Wainwright, is going to give it the big one once again, and he's running around that outside line down through the hairpin, and he makes it stick. Michael Booth up into the lead. James Dye, for the first time in this race, demoted to 2nd. James Wainwright will have been paying great interest to the goings on ahead of him. Head down now, chasing him up once again towards the S's, but Michael Booth under pressure from James Dye. James trying to get straight back at him, and Josh Cagle and Rob Guinan there. That's the 5 leaders. And there, looking back to Jack Sim and Michael Collins. And behind Michael still Ben Cater running 2nd of the challenge runners. But Michael Booth stretching a little from James Dye. The two of them getting away slightly from this battle for 3rd now, where James Wainwright and Josh Cagle and Rob Guinan are all as close as you like. But up the front, it's looking better at the moment. Look, there he goes. Michael Booth looking very confident. Oh, he just chucks it in there. It is still raining, but there's less actually coming out of the sky at this point. But there are a lot of puddles, as you can see. Steve Smith picking his way between them. Running in 6th place at the moment and trying to get in touch with the leading group of 5. James Wainwright, you see, having broken away a little from Josh Cagle and trying to get back in touch with Michael Booth and James Dye ahead of him. And there we see Steve Smith once again in 6th place. And Ricky Chadwick, the leader of the challenge, being harassed there by young gun Jack Sim. And Jack just, well, easing past on the inside. Ricky won't mind about that. He is happy enough to be leading the challenge, particularly this weekend, where things not going quite his way in terms of the Super Bowl race and in qualifying. But with Tony Hart's disappearance, finding himself leading the challenge once again. Meanwhile, up the front is Michael Booth from James Dye. James Wainwright really got back in touch with the two leaders. So 3 for it, splashing through the puddles, and still Josh Cahill and Rob Guinan trying to stay in touch. James Dye, this time, you fancy he's winding up for the big one here. He really is closed right in on Michael Booth, and he has a little look up the inside there. And James Wainwright staying very interested in 3rd place, but in these conditions he'll be keeping an eye on proceedings ahead. Meanwhile, AJ is running in 7th place. Just ahead of him is Steve Smith, but going around the sweeps at the back of the circuit here at Pembrey. I don't think we're going to get a sight of Steve. We might do as we come onto the start-finish straight. That's a real long blast down there, and blasting down it Michael Booth. He's got this very quick line. Well, it's been very successful for him up to now into Hatchett's hairpin, and that time James Wainwright closing mightily on James Dye, and they've got a lapped runner to play with as well. It could cost both of them, and in fact Michael Booth, well, seizing the opportunity to get away a little from his two rivals. And there, Josh Cahill under pressure from Rob Guinan. Rob already visited the podium, of course, this year. Had some great results, particularly up at Snetterton, when it was as dry and hot and sunny as you like. Well, it ain't like that down here in the valleys, but undaunted, Michael Booth from James Dye and James Wainwright, those 3 leaders, and look, in and out of the traffic they go, and they've really broken the toe back to Josh Cahill. Josh there still got Rob Guinan for close company, running in 4th and 5th, but you fancy the win is all about the 3 in the lead, and Michael Booth looking very definite and determined when he comes up to lap the slower runners, and that is so important in racing. If you're the leader, you don't really have the benefit as you come up to lap the slower runners, because let's face it, if you're leading, it's the first time anybody's gone past them. Once you've gone past them, they go, uh-oh, and they start looking out for blue flags. Not the easiest thing in these conditions, as we said before. But Michael Booth it is, that leads. James Dye still in 2nd. Still James Wainwright there in 3rd, with less than half a lap left to run in this first Triumph race of the weekend. Well, has anybody got anything in the locker? Michael Booth it is, leads down to Honda for the last time, but James Dye very quick under braking, and he goes through on the inside, but Michael Booth gets an excellent exit. Well, no, James Dye's going to hang on to it. Checkered flag and a brilliant win there. Well, you fancy stole that at the last. James Dye gets the win from Michael Booth. James Wainwright in 3rd. Josh Cahill a great 4th. Rob Guinan 5th, and Steve Smith in 6th place. That's the Michelin Young Guns, and there they are. And, well, they're all looking very cheerful and happy on the podium. And in the challenge, it was another good win for Ricky Chadwick from Ben Cater and Paul Davis. And all smiles and cheers in the rain. But it's a very happy camp down there in the Folkard family unit. And we will look forward to the 2nd race of the Aprilia Superteens. That comes up next. Welcome back to Pembrey for the 2nd round of the Aprilia RS125 Superteens. Danny Kent, number 52, on pole position. He'll have alongside him 24 Johnny Blackshaw, 4 James Folkard, and 44 George Rustling. 2nd row, 71 Ross Ashman, 79 Grant Whittaker, 23 Sean Winfield, and 9 Reese Rothwell. And away they run this long straight at Pembrey down towards the very, very tight hairpin of Hatchett's, and it's Johnny Blackshaw that gets his face in front at the hairpin for the first time of asking, and Grant Whittaker slips up the inside, so relegating James Folkard and Danny Kent to 3rd and 4th respectively. And there Jack Blake in the rookie vest, the orange rookie vest, picking his way through ahead of Ross Ashman for the leaders, already making their way down in front of the clubhouse towards the S's. Johnny Blackshaw in the lead. Done under braking there by James Folkard. And further back we see Josh Harlan there, number 69. He's just 12 years old, but has proved very capable already. And believe me, just because he's 12 doesn't mean to say he has no experience. He's done a lot of racing in his life already. And just behind Josh there was number 99, Tom Stanford. Meanwhile, at the front, still James Folkard in the lead from Johnny Blackshaw. And James, having won the race earlier on today in these awful conditions, is picking his way around once again and looking fairly confident at the moment. But Grant Whittaker up the inside of Johnny Blackshaw at the hairpin. George Rustling running around the outside of Danny Kent. Danny will not like that at all. He was a good and fighting second in that earlier race to James Folkard, but going backwards at the moment for Danny. James Folkard looking comfortable in the lead. Grant Whittaker, that second place already under pressure from Johnny Blackshaw. I would like that back, thank you very much. And George Rustling getting his face in there. There's the second little group. Reese Rothwell ahead of Danny Buchan. And there, 66 going through the shop, Casey Wyatt, who picked up a top 6 finish in the earlier race and was running very well indeed. But James Folkard now down the straight, and behind him, Grant Whittaker taking a long look over your shoulder. You don't need to look too far there, Grant. They're right with you. Danny Kent nipping back up into third place. And there, Reese Rothwell trying to detach himself from the following group and catch that little bunch of leaders ahead of him. And there they are. James Folkard already gone through, but Grant Whittaker, well, they're queuing up to get by, aren't they? And Johnny Blackshaw takes the outside line. He's not, I don't think, going to squeeze through. And Danny Kent says, okay guys, here I come, up the inside. And he just knits through into third. He nearly had both of them. And James Folkard, championship leader, still leads this race. Grant Whittaker in second, Danny Kent third, George Rustling now up into fourth, got ahead of Johnny Blackshaw. Johnny has occupied every position from first to fifth in this race so far. Maybe like the other ones. Go on. He's attached to the back of George Rustling. You can be absolutely guaranteed he's not out of this yet. Look at that rain still absolutely tanking down, but seemingly oblivious to it. James Folkard has now got himself a very comfortable lead indeed. So really it's about the shout behind. Who's going to get that second step of the podium? At the moment, Grant Whittaker appears to have 1.5 feet firmly on it. Danny Kent, though, in third, under pressure from George Rustling. And there, Jack Blake in midfield, and Danny Kent looking to his right, and George Rustling takes the opportunity just to nick round on the left. Oh, what a big twitch there. Well, Danny Kent was caught out. He was having a look at Johnny Blackshaw coming up the inside. He wasn't really paying attention to George, and he loses out there 2 positions, Danny Kent. So Johnny Blackshaw slips up into third, George Rustling back up into fourth, and Danny Kent, well, running in fifth at the moment. All this, of course, playing nicely into the hands of James Folkard. He has that clear and comfortable lead. Well, it's anything but clear and comfortable for this lot. Danny Kent comes back at George Rustling and sticks it up the inside. And oh, he nearly takes Johnny Blackshaw as well, but he looks as though he just touched the curb and he loses everything he gained. He goes back into fifth, and George Rustling up into fourth. Grant Whittaker taking the opportunity for another sneaky look over the shoulder. Yep, they're still with you, Grant. And just that little gap developing. Well, these gaps develop and close throughout the race. These young riders, it's a long learning curve. They're on it. They improve race for race. But there, James Folkard not under any sort of pressure. The only real pressure in this race is pressure that he induces on himself. He's just watching out. Make no mistakes. Stay on board. Finish. Get the flag. Get the points. Grant Whittaker in a good second place. Danny Kent having this wonderful battle with George Russing. He looks right, he looks left, he's up alongside him, and they're just ahead of him, Grant Whittaker and Johnny Blackshaw. But Danny trying absolutely everything, but George Russing, he's not to be moved. He's there in fourth place and he's hanging on to it. Johnny Blackshaw closing your fancy on Grant Whittaker as another very quick look over the shoulder there, see what's happening behind. What's happening is George Russing and Danny Kent absolutely together. There's Ross Ashman. Ross chasing along behind the leading group. If anything goes wrong, he'll be there to pick up the pieces and pick up the points. But Grant Whittaker and Johnny Blackshaw heads down. Johnny going for it this time as they come down to the hairpin, but Grant's not giving way and just maintains his line through hatchets. Beautifully done. Johnny trying absolutely everything and Grant repelling borders. There, Danny Kent back ahead of George Russing and not far behind. Meanwhile, James Folkard, look at the gap. He's just eking out by a second or so a lap. And behind is where all the action is. Johnny Blackshaw dogging the footsteps of Grant Whittaker and Danny Kent. It's like if he could pick that bike up like Fred Flintstone and run it round any faster, you know he would. He's just willing it forward. But time running out in this race for him. And there we see Sean Winfield. Great to see Sean back on board. He was at Brands. That was his return after injury earlier in the year. He picked up a nasty injury to his hand on the test day before Snetterton. But gradually, by dint of taking in a few motocross races as well as a return to the Aprilia Superteens, his hand getting stronger. James Folkard, lovely shot of him there, just holding that concentration and maintaining his advantage at the front of this race. Through the spray he comes around in front of the clubhouse and down towards the S's. And you can see there's still the odd twitch there. It is very slippery underfoot, but a superb advantage now back to Grant Whittaker still. And this the last lap of the weekend for the Aprilia RS125 Superteens. That's it, James. Oh, he said, where are they? Where have they gone? No, it's all right, they're there. Don't worry, there's four of them in with a genuine shout now for the rest of the podium, but James Folkard surely is going to be atop it. And behind, at it like knives, still Johnny Blackshaw and Grant Whittaker. But here, James Folkard, yes, number one, he knows where the camera is, and there's the checker flag. A great victory for James Folkard, and Grant Whittaker just getting back past Johnny Blackshaw right at the end there. Danny Kent finishing fourth ahead of George Russing in that titanic battle. Reese Rothwell sixth. And here after the race, well, there's a lot of post-race chat. They do all get on very well, these young riders. It's great to see, and you can also see there's a really good family atmosphere surrounding the Superteens. All sorts, mothers, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, aunts, you name it, they're there. And Grant Whittaker congratulating James on the win. And no, he's not being rude, he's just saying, look, I was second, mate. And James saying, were you? And Grant, yeah, he's, well, yeah, okay, James commiserating with Johnny Blackshaw as well. And there we see that manoeuvre. Johnny Blackshaw just got ahead in the braking area to the last corner. Grant Whittaker just slips back. And Grant, wonderful battle. Both that battle for second and third and for fourth and fifth. And superbly done. Another trophy. And very pleased he'll be about that. Johnny Blackshaw, second place, a fighting second if ever there was one, going to Grant Whittaker. But once again, the win in the Aprilia RS125 Superteens. It's the boy from Liverpool, James Folkard. He gets a winner's hat to go with his winner's hat. He gets his winner's garland and a lovely trophy as well. And there we see three very cheerful guys indeed. Yeah, love it. They don't mind the weather. So, a good day for Grant Whittaker at second and the third. We caught up with him in the paddock.
Yeah, I'm very pleased. Been a good all-around good day today in the wet. So, yeah, love the wet. So, been a good day. Yeah.
Just couldn't quite keep up with James though.
No, we just been having a couple of problems with the gearing today. But that's why he's steadily creeped away. But I think we'll have him next time.
James, a really wet weekend here at Pembrey, but it doesn't seem to have slowed you down at all.
No, just found the grip, worked with that really. And the bike's been working really well, thanks to John. But yeah, just all round good weekend.
And John, you must be really happy with James's progress. You got big plans for this lad?
Absolutely. Hopefully, as James has said earlier, we're looking to try and get him to certainly BSB, and if he shows some promise there, maybe Spanish Championship. But I found him when he was 11 and a half years of age, and we've moved him through from the JRA 80 up to Superteen, and as we know, he had a bad do in 05, but he's clearly come back from that big time.
And big time it is as far as James Folkard's concerned. He leads the standings from Danny Kent, Johnny Blackshaw third, Grant Whittaker fourth, George Rustling fifth, and Reece Rothwell in sixth place. And next up, the second race of the weekend for the Triumph Challenge. Welcome back to Pembrey once again in the wet for the second of the Triumph Triple Challenge races. James Wainwright there, thumbs up. On pole position is Michael Booth, then James Wainwright, then James Dye, and there's Tony Hart, number 34, the leading challenge runner. The red flag moves away, the red lights will flick on and off, and then they'll be away, and James Dye first on the move, but Michael Booth from pole position gets a very good start there. James Wainwright up between the two of them, down into this extreme hairpin of hatchets they go, and James Wainwright running wide there, and he's run right. He will recover. He's not gone into the gravel trap, but that's an absolutely horrible start for poor old James. Meanwhile, at the front, his closest rivals, well, away in the spray, Michael Booth it is. That leads from James Dye, and then, well, they're hunting in packs there. I see Rob Guinan running around the outside of that clubhouse turn. And there, the purple wet weather gear of Ben Cater picked up a second place in the challenge earlier, and right at the back of the field, James Wainwright recovering from running wide at the hairpin. He'll have to try and pick his way through the field. He's a press-on sort of character, James. He will give it a go. And there indeed he is. He's picked off a couple of them already. But up front, Michael Booth once again. Well, Michael led for most of the earlier race and was just nicked at the last corner by James Dye. And there, a lovely shot of AJ Hutchinson. He's the young Irish rider who's been the camera bike for the last few events. And Michael Booth then still in the lead from James Dye, and up into third, Josh Cahill, who's got another wonderful start. He had a good race earlier on. There, once again, we see AJ. Green wheel at the front, red at the back. That's so he knows which way to sit round on the bike. And the leader's coming back down towards us. And look at Josh. He's got away from the chasing group and he's latching himself onto the leaders. Absolutely flying in these conditions. Oh, and flying he does straight off on the entry into Honda. He's up and away. He has he thinks, I'll tell you what, he's like every rider, isn't he? He thinks, will that go again? Go on, I'll give it. Oh, all right, I won't. And trudging back to the marshal's post. What a shame, Josh having such a good run up to then. There's Ben Cater. Again, we can pick him out easily with those purple wet weather overalls on over his leathers. And there in third place, after the disappearance of Josh Cahill, we have Rob Guinan being chased by Steve Smith and AJ Hutchinson. AJ running up in fifth place. I think that's the highest position he's run all year. So another young rider who's learning and riding well in these horrible conditions. Third, fourth and fifth running down towards us once again. And AJ's dad, a regular attender at these events, and he's always got his video camera with him, making the movie of the son's racing career. And Michael Booth and James Dye getting away a little at the front. Well, poor old Michael Booth, you wonder at this stage what he must be feeling. This was the pattern in the earlier race. He led and he led well. He just couldn't shake off James Dye, and James nabbed him in the end. Meanwhile, further back, James Wainwright is gradually carving his way through the pack after that horrible start. There's Paul Davis, who picked up a trophy for third in the challenge in the earlier race. But James Wainwright has already blown past him and making progress up the field. James will be on the ragged edge. He will not want to make any sort of mistake, but he knows he's just got to press on to the checkered flag. The two leaders, you see, already open up a significant advantage over the rest at this stage in proceedings. And Michael Booth trading fastest laps with James Dye, but quicker than either of them at this stage. James Wainwright, as he works his way through the field, regularly clocking fastest times. Lovely shot in these conditions there. Look at that of James Dye in second place. A relentless pursuit. And just as Michael Booth must be worrying, when is James Dye going to come at me? James Dye will be thinking, well, when do I make my move? Do I save it to the last lap? Well, we see further back Tony Hart there, just ahead of Paul Davis, and in front of the two of them, Ricky Chadwick. Those are the challenge runners. So far, the Michelin Young Guns have had things almost entirely their own way this season. Tony Hart nearly disturbed them by winning the Super Bowl race, but in fact just ended with fourth place in that. As the leaders once more down towards Honda Curve, the marshals standing there absolutely soaked to the skin. We mention them time and again, but hey, it's worth mentioning. It's a long old weekend for them, and they will be not just soaking wet but freezing cold as well. Michael Booth and James Dye, though, at the moment oblivious to all that. It's just heavy concentration time as far as they're concerned. Michael desperate not to make the slightest error, and James Dye sussing out the lines, every corner, every straight a possibility. Is he going to save his big effort for the last corner of the last lap once again? Well, at the moment, he's turning up the wick and closing in on Michael ahead of him. Good to see these two young riders not giving in either to the conditions or to the pressure. And there, James Wainwright, he's still flying, still the quickest runner out there, carving his way through the field, desperate to get decent points at the end of this. And James Dye almost pulling up alongside Michael Booth as they run down towards that wicked hairpin of Hatchets once again. That long straight, by the way, was an ex-runway when the RAF had Pembrey as an airbase. I think it was decommissioned in the early 80s. There, this great battle for third place. Rob Garner just nipping up the inside ahead of Steve Smith and AJ Hutchinson riding shotgun at the back of him there. And as they go down towards DeBenny, well, Rob Guinan runs a little wide on the entry and Steve Smith nicks that position again, but Rob Guinan coming back on the inside at Clubhouse Corner. So at the moment, Rob Guinan up into third ahead of Steve Smith, and AJ right there to pick up the pieces should anything go silly ahead of him. Which, of course, we hope for their sakes it doesn't. But as we come to the closing stages of this race, leaders coming up on back markers. There's David Giffel going through the shot, and there's Michael Booth and Michael Eglinton also there. And Michael Booth runs wide, and James Dye could take advantage. And sure enough, he sticks it up the inside. They got past one of the slower bikes. They've still got another one to deal with. Oh, poor old Michael Booth. He's led every inch of this race so far. Surely it can't happen again. He led most of the earlier one and was just done on the last corner. Oh, it's deja vu time, one feels. James Dye hits the front. Michael Booth now. They've got clear of the slower runners. It's just going to be a flat-out blast to the finish. But, oh, Michael must be feeling pig sick with this. He's still having to concentrate so hard in these conditions. But look at him, head down. I want that lead back. Little nod of the head there. He will be absolutely furious. James Dye, absolutely exultant though. This could be 2 races, 2 wins for James Dye here at Pembrey this weekend. Fantastic stuff as far as he's concerned. And there, the checkered flag. It goes the way of James Dye. A 2nd win for him from poor Michael Booth. Steve Smith, an excellent third, got back up to 3rd ahead of Rob Guinan. AJ Hutchinson, his best result of the year so far, in 5th, and Jack Sim 6th. And, well, I don't know how Michael Booth can raise a smile. Thank goodness he can. And there we see Steve Smith just getting 3rd from Rob Guinan, and we spoke to him afterwards.
First time I rode it was at Snetterton, and we just didn't get used to it, you know. So, but yeah, to get 3rd now, we're a lot happier. You know, me and the team a lot happier now. So,
Mike, double 2nd here this weekend. You just couldn't quite nip Jimmy, could you?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I led both races for quite a few laps. I was hoping to win them both, but Jimmy put up a real good fight. Unfortunately, look, maybe one on my side on the last laps of both races, and he got through. But it's nice to get beaten by a mate, so I'm happy.
James, difficult conditions here at Pembrey, but 2 good wins in the wet. You must enjoy it.
Yeah, I like the wet. It was really good. Mike set a really fast pace at the front. I was just following him. And in the last laps in both races, I managed to get him. And we had a bit of ducking and diving in the first race. I'd like to thank my sponsor, Destination Triumph. Yeah, good racing.
And good racing too from the challenge runners, with a 1st win in the challenge for Adam Kemp from Ben Cater and Tony Hart.
Ben, on the rostrum here this weekend in the Triple Challenge, you must be really chuffed about that one.
Very pleased, yeah. I'm new to racing, so it's new to the rostrum as well. 2 seconds, it's good.
Adam, overall winner of the Triple Challenge this weekend.
Yeah.
Were you expecting that?
Not at all, no. I've never actually ridden on those tyres before, and never ridden in the wet before. Never been to this track before, so I'm well impressed.
So James Dye takes the lead in the Triumph Triple Challenge from Michael Booth, and Ollie Linsell slips down to 3rd. Ollie, who had a huge accident on the Saturday and couldn't race on the Sunday, but should be fit and well, all things considered, by the time we meet again at Liddon Hill in Kent.